Good day, folks. I'm on the Edinburgh bus tours today. I'm going to show you around Edinburgh, points of interest, and we have a guide here and he'll be telling us all about the places that we're going to be passing and visiting. Okay? So here we go, folks. We're kicking off now.
Edinburgh bus tour. My name's John. I'll be your guide on the tour, and our driver is also called John. Up to the left when we come out into the middle of the road there, you'll see there's a grey and cream building up the top, which is very wittily called the Birkenhead Lap Dancing Club. I don't know what we're doing there. But before it was a lap dancing club, it was the Birkenhead pub, and before it was a pub, well, it wasn't there at all. It was an open street called Tanner's Close, where Burke and Hare lived in a boarding house. Hare had half shares in the boarding house just up there. An old man died in the boarding house owing Hare £3, so he sold his body to Robert Knox for £7.10, and that set them off. Right, coming down to the Grass Market from 1377 to 1911. This was the major timber, livestock and agricultural market in Edinburgh. It's a great place. It's one of my favourite places in the Old Town, and it's unusual in the Old Town because it's a wide open space. There aren't many wide open spaces in the Old Town, but we retain the space in the Grass Market. The Grass Market is our next bus stop as well. It's got some lovely restaurants. It's got some of the best little restaurants in the Old Town, or in Edinburgh, and some really good pubs and cafes and shops. Anybody from the Grass Market? No one for the Grass Market. Thank you very much, John. If you change your mind, you can always wave at me, and John will stop, and you can leave. Well, when we get past the Fiddler's Arms here on the left, this pub, if you look up to your left, it goes up to the back of the castle, and on the left-hand side you'll see there's a grey pub called the Beehive. If you go through the Beehive here, there's a beer garden at the back, and it is one of the best beer gardens in Edinburgh. One, because it sells beer, and two, because it's directly underneath the Castle Rock. And it's got great views. You can touch the Castle Rock from there practically. On the left-hand side, the White Hart Inn. That's the oldest pub within the old city walls of Edinburgh. It was established in 1516. There is one older 14th century pub called the Sheep Heap, the Sheep Head. That was outside the city walls in the Hollywood Park area of Edinburgh. We're coming up to the bus stop for the Grass Market at the moment. I really must learn the numbers of the bus stops. I had 12 weeks off, and when I came back they changed the route. And the bus stops, and the numbers. So I'm still trying to get my head around the new numbers. So I'll tell you the place rather than the number, and you can look on your map and you'll go if you want. Oh, hello. Good evening. Hello. Hi. The Grass Market, until quite recently, relatively recently, this was not a great place to come. It was a bit rough. I think it was very rough for a long time. There was lots of homeless people, there were lots of drunks here, there was lots of people drinking bottles of Buckfast, as we call it in Scotland, very cheap wine around here. I worked in a theatre here in the 1970s, and when you joined the theatre company, you were given self-defence classes. But when you came out of the theatre at night, it was really, really rough. I can't tell you how different it is now. You could never say that about the Grass Market now. It's one of the best hospitality areas in the town. And as I said, people ask for recommendations for restaurants in the centre of Edinburgh. You really can't go wrong with any of the restaurants or pub food here in the Grass Market because competition is so stiff. You have to be good. Now, coming up to the top of the Grass Market, there are two things to point out at the top. One was the site of public execution in the Grass Market for hundreds of years. The last public execution in Edinburgh happened up near St Giles High Church as late as 1856. But on your left-hand side there's railings and a stone circle within the railings. That was the site of public execution, where people not only were hanged, but some people were burned there, some people were strangled there. Just on your left-hand side. And up the hill, on the left, is Victoria Street, one of my favourite streets in Edinburgh, and Victoria Terrace. Some people say that's the inspiration for Diagon Alley. You know what's coming. J.K. Rowling says, no it's not. Right, we're coming up into Candlemaker Row. See if you can guess what we made in Candlemaker Row. The Candlemakers were moved here at the beginning of the 18th century because of the risk of fire, also because of the smell. Candles were made from animal fat. Now, on the other side of this road here is Greyfriars Churchyard in Greyfriars Church. Greyfriars Church was built on the site of a 15th century abbey, and it opened supposedly on the same day the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth Rock in November 1620. And the whole story is on the inside of the church. Greyfriars Bobby, the little dog, is up on your left-hand side here, and he slept on his owner John Gray's grave behind these buildings on the right in the churchyard from 1858 to 1872. Well, some people believe that rubbing a lump of brass or bronze will bring you luck. Now, if you really have to rub the statue, if you do it really carefully, please, because it is destroying the statue. This rubbing Greyfriars Bobby for luck, it only really started about 7 years ago. Nobody had ever thought of it before then. If you see the old photographs of Bobby, his nose is completely unrubbed. But they're now talking about having to move the statue or encase it in perspex, which wouldn't be a great thing for this area. It's been here since 1872. That's in there on your left-hand side. Now going into the University of Edinburgh's main area once again. On the left-hand side, that's the back of the National Museum of Scotland. This is the Scottish section. It was built in the 1990s, and then 10 years later we bolted it on a Victorian building, which we'll see in less than 5 minutes' time. Now, as we turn past this building, we'll come to a stone block structure here, right now on the left, sticking out. That's meant to represent the open drawer of the filing cabinet. It's very clever, and I never spotted it. Coming into the road here, with the twin turrets, is TV Row House, which is the oldest purpose-built student union building in the world, where over 30 years ago I met my wife. Well, coming into Forest Road, on the right-hand side, we'll be turning down here, past the medical school once again. Well, between the medical school and the primary building, there are two pillars. Just here on the left, there's a unicorn on each pillar. The unicorn is the heraldic beast of Scotland, and they're guarding the northern entrance into an area called the Meadows. The Meadows is a massive public park. Until the mid-17th century, it was a lake, the South Loch. Edinburgh drew its water, its drinking water, from the South Loch, or the Barrow Loch, it was also called. It was then blamed, wrongly, with causing an outbreak of the plague, a particularly terrible outbreak of the plague in the mid-17th century, and it was drained and turned into common recreation ground and common grazing ground. And it was that until the 1920s. But it became a public park. Lovely place for a walk. Don't do it after dark. It's a pity, but it's always been the case. Here on the left-hand side, Thomas J. Wells used to be an optician, now I guess the best coffee in Edinburgh. Here on the left now is this little blue pub, Sandy Bells, the Forest Hill Bar. that looks just like a scruffy corner pub, and that is exactly what it is. But it's world famous. People come from all over the world to play and listen to folk and traditional music in that pub. Any Lou Harris was played in that pub. When they allowed people back into the pubs, they had to wear masks. So the deal was the musicians could play their instruments, but they weren't allowed to sing, which was terrible for the folk singers. It was a huge relief to most of the rest of us. I'm going to turn to our right-hand side here and into Chambers Street. And Chambers Street is the street which houses the National Museum of Scotland and also many, many university buildings. Anybody for the National Museum? No one for Chambers Street. Thank you very much, John. Now, I said this building here on the right-hand side, that's the Scottish section. It really is one of the world's great museums, and it was only made better when they put up the Scottish section in the 1990s and joined them. It was just going to be a standalone museum, but they joined it on to the main building. Now, the main building is magnificent. The foundation stone was laid by Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, in September 1861. He then died of typhoid in December 1861, which doesn't really seem plausible now. Now here, the right-hand side is Chambers Street. We'll be turning into it. The Victorian building was designed by an Irishman who came from the same part of the north of Ireland as Burke and Eyre, Francis Fowke. He was a captain in the Royal Engineers, and he designed this magnificent Victorian iron and glass palace. They moved the entrance from those doors to street level, and I understand why, for accessibility. But as a child, looking up those steps, and through those doors was just magnificent. Here on the right-hand side is Old College. Old College was built on the site of the original University of Edinburgh buildings from the 1580s. It's the fourth oldest university in Scotland, but crucially, it's the first independent university in Scotland, erected and opened after the Reformation, so with no permissions or charters from the Vatican. Turning left into South Bridge, there are 19 arches on this bridge, only one of them built on, and as we come down here, if you look to your left and your right, you can see that we're rolling John Church ahead of us there on the left. It's a 17th century church. It isn't a church anymore. It's an interpretive centre for Edinburgh's UNESCO World Heritage Sites. We have 3 in Edinburgh. The Old Town is a World Heritage Site. The New Town is a World Heritage Site. And if you go down to South Queensferry, we've got the Firth Bridge. And the other 2 bridges, but it's the Firth Bridge really. The rail bridge from the 1890s. That is another World Heritage Site. We'll turn down to our right-hand side and into the second part of the High Street, and that will take us down towards Hollywood. As we turn, we see the coats of arms of families who lived here, but I think that is not true. Here on your right-hand side, the Madison Blue Hotel. It looks like it's been there forever. It's only been there since 1990. It's about to represent 5 Old Town tenement buildings in a row, and they've done a fantastic job. Here on the left, Paisley Close, between the Whisky and Wine and Thistledown Isle. That building collapsed in 1861, killing 34 people. They were just about to give up looking for survivors when they heard a child, Joseph McIver, shout, "Heave awa chaps, I'm not dead yet. Heave away chaps, I'm not dead yet." And when I was growing up, this building was called Heave Awa House. Heave Away House. If you look at the arch between the Whisky and Wine and Thistledown Isle, there's a child's head carved into the arch, and above it on the scroll it says, "Evil war chaps, and no deed yet." That led directly to 1867 and the Old Town Improvement Act in Edinburgh. And we've ended up with this anomaly that many of the buildings in the Old Town are actually younger than many of the buildings in the New Town. Because from 1867 they started to knock down the worst of the tenements. Some of them were rebuilt with a stone from being knocked down. But a lot of these buildings, this is a relatively new building there on the left hand side. But here on the left at the end, sticking out, we've got two of the oldest houses in Edinburgh. Mowbray House on the left, and beside it where it says Scottish Storytelling Centre, that is John Knox House. John Knox was a 16th century Scottish religious reformer. We don't think he ever lived in that house, but he did preach just up the hill there at St Giles High Church. So that's where his connection with the building comes in. Looking right down to the distance there, you can see the sea. Now the sea's always been very important to Edinburgh. You've got three main ports, Leith, Granton and Newhaven. Leith was Scotland's most important port for hundreds and hundreds of years, until trade developed with the North American continent. And obviously if you're going to trade with North America, you don't want your port to be on the east coast of Scotland. You want it on the left, on the west coast. So Glasgow became the most important port in Scotland. Two other ports, Granton, that's a superliner terminal, we had a cruise ship in yesterday, and Newhaven. Newhaven has got some of the best seafood restaurants in Scotland. It's a little fishing port, and the service bus down there, number 7, will take you down to Newhaven to the seafood restaurants. These buildings in the late 17th century, the original buildings in here, were getting up sometimes to 14 stories tall. When we talk about the closes, you can see there Hindford's Close on the right hand side. The closes, there were over 150 of them in the 17th century, and they sloped all the way down either side of the Royal Mile. There were enclosures and there were allotments, small farms, and enclosure became shortened to close, and it stuck. The World's End Close here. And this is the World's End where Edinburgh ended and the Canongate began until 1856. The Canongate was a separate town in Edinburgh, nominally at least. Right, coming down the Canongate, and on your right hand side there are two stone needles pointing up on the right hand side, and behind them is Murray House. Murray House is where the Act of Union between Scotland and England was signed in June 1707. Since 1958 it's been Edinburgh's teacher training college, and J.K. Rowling, she studied at Murray House to become a teacher for a time, and that's Murray House in there on the right hand side. On the left hand side, where that Victorian clock is the Canongate toll booth. This dates from the 15th century until the present day. Bits added, bits taken away. Canongate Church on the left hand side, the church the Queen attends when she's in Edinburgh. It's a 17th century church, and it's another one of those fantastic churchyards. You can have a walk around in Edinburgh for fun, and just some great graves in there with famous people who lived in Edinburgh. Now coming right down to Holyrood. Would anybody like this bus stop? No, I'll take this stop, John, thank you. In the distance you can see part of Holyrood Abbey sticking up. In front of it, with the turrets, is the oldest still standing part of the palace. That is the Northwest Tower, built by King James V, Lady Queen of Scots' father, in the 16th century, and all the modern day palace was built on to that tower. We'll be coming back to the palace in just a few minutes' time, but we're going to turn to our right now. On the right hand side is the Parliament building, designed by a Spanish architect, Enrique Morales, who sadly died before his building could be finished. If you look at this building, you see there are black shapes on the windows. Have a think about what those black shapes could be, and we'll talk about those in just a couple of minutes' time. Ahead of us we've got the Salisbury Crags. Now the Salisbury Crags are very, very, very important in the history of geology and also in the history of our understanding of the planet. James Hutton, the father of geology, did much of his work up there in the 18th century on his book The Theory of the Earth, which for the first time took the opinion that the Earth was 6,000 years old and replaced it with the knowledge that it was hundreds of millions of years older than that. 4.6 billion at the current latest count. And I hope everyone downstairs can hear the tour. Who wants to? Right, coming into the park, 650 acres of wilderness in the middle of the city. The Highlands of Scotland is miniature. It's a tiny mountain, 823 feet off the sea. There are 3 lakes: Dunsapie Loch, St Margaret's Loch, Duddingston Loch. Dunsapie Loch is elevated behind these hills, and 2 years ago, in the middle of the city centre, 2 otters found their way into Dunsapie Loch. How? They're still there, as far as I know. On your right hand side, the white roof is on Dynamic Earth. Now, Dynamic Earth celebrates James Hutton and the Salisbury Crags, and ultimately the planet. It was the idea of 2 scientists at Edinburgh University. They wanted to design a millennial project. This was the first millennial project to open in Britain. It's a wonderful, wonderful attraction. Takes about 2.5 hours. You go in a time machine back to the Big Bang, and it brings you right up to the present day. It's interactive all the way through, and it really is worth visiting. I can't do it justice. On the left-hand side is Berkeley House. This opened in 1999 by the Queen as the home of the Scotsman newspaper. This building is now the home of a company called Rockstar North. Now, if you've never heard of Rockstar North, I'm guessing you've heard of their main product, which is Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto 5, in its first 24 hours, brought in income of more than £575 million. Also in that building, we came up with the concept of swipe left and swipe right. And I've got absolutely no idea what that means. Dynamic Earth. Now, the steps leading up to this building are also seats. And on your right hand side there's a stage. This is a fabulous little amphitheatre which has never been used because the locals with the expensive flats didn't want the noise from the proposed summer concerts. Anybody for this stop? No one for here, John, thank you. Now, the cream building ahead of us with the red roof is Queensberry House, 17th century. The Marquis of Queensberry, he came back there in June 1707 after signing the Act of Union between Scotland and England, and discovered that his 10-year-old son, James, Earl of Drumlanrig, who was always kept locked up, described at the time as an imbecile and dangerously insane, he'd escaped, he'd knocked over a kitchen boy, he was roasting him on a spit and eating him. He was taken away from Edinburgh, not surprisingly, and he died 8 years later in either Yorkshire or Lincolnshire in England, we don't know which. But from that moment he became known as the cannibalistic idiot, which seems fair enough. All this land, for over 1,000 years, has been, or was, a royal estate. The Queen gave the park back to the people as a millennial gift in 1999. King David I was down here hunting in 1127 when a giant white stag frightened his horse. He fell off the horse. The stag was about to kill him. David looked up and saw a gold cross between its antlers. He reached up to touch the cross and the stag disappeared. That night in a dream, Scotland's saint, St Andrew, came to him and told him to show his gratitude on the spot whenever the incident happened, he should erect a religious building. Nothing like that ever happens these days, does it? So a year later, in 1128, he opened Holyrood Abbey, first occupied by the Canons Regular, Augustinians from Merton Priory in the Colliers Wood area of London. Beside the abbey, he built a small guest house. Over the centuries, the guest house grew and developed until it became the Palace of Holyrood House. The irony, the palace vanished. The abbey is now a ruin. Now, if you look into the palace here, this is the Queen's official home in Scotland. She normally comes here for a week at the end of June. Unfortunately, she's not very well, so she won't be coming this year. She will send a representative, and it probably won't be Prince Andrew. He's retired from public life. Well, it wasn't really his public life that we were concerned about. Now, the palace is on your right, the Parliament is on your left, and the black shapes on the windows, what are they? Well, those black shapes on the windows are drawn back curtains to show you that Scotland has open government. And apparently an adult came up with that idea. Right, we're coming to our next bus stop for the Palace and the Parliament. Anyone for this bus stop? No one for this bus stop, John. Thank you very much. On the right hand side, the little stone building with a slate roof is known as Queen Mary's Bathhouse. Legend has it, Mary Queen of Scots, who lived at the palace from 1561 to 1567, would walk from the palace to this building one day every year for a bath, whether she needed a bath or not. Just a legend, of course.
Okay.
Looking down to our right hand side here, to the north gates. These are called the tourist gates. Now, I can remember when you could drive your car through the tourist gates and park in front of the palace. The world has changed so much in such a very, very short time. Coming up, Abbey Mount. Abbey Mount's a hill. Now, the Scottish word for a hill is a brae, B-R-A-E. And John's been really good to you here, because this railway bridge houses about 90% of the population of Edinburgh's pigeons. There's another reason to do that. So, John has stopped on this side. So, you will be okay. We'll go through when the traffic moves. Now, we'll be going up Abbey Mount, and we'll see there's a really, really excellent modern building. Go into Regent Road. Regent Road is one of the lovely streets in Edinburgh for a couple of reasons. It's got Regent Terrace overlooking it, some of the most expensive housing in Edinburgh, beginning around about £2 million to negotiate, and then going up the way. Now, if you go across the hill here, through the traffic lights on the other side, you'd be in a street called Easter Road. It used to be called the Easter Road to Leith, and it runs over a mile to the north of the city to the port of Leith. If you go down Easter Road a couple of hundred yards, tuck to your right hand side, you'll come into Albion Place at Easter Road Stadium, where the Birmingham Football Club play their home fixtures. But we're not going down to Leith, we're going to turn to our left. Now, if you look out the left-hand side of the bus, most of you will probably be able to see Regent Terrace set up on the hill there, on the left. There are three consular facilities up there. The French Consul General's home, the Swiss Consulate, and the American Consulate, which is number 3 Regent Terrace. Now, number 3 Regent Terrace, that wasn't the first American consulate. The first American consulate in Edinburgh opened in the St. James Place in 1778. Being one of the first in the world. And how about this on your left, for a view in the middle of the city? The slopes, Arthur's Seat, Salisbury Crags, and down past very No one on the top deck. Thank you very much, John, for this bus stop. On your left-hand side coming up is the Burns Monument, which was Thomas Hamilton. It's in memory of Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet, who lived from 1759 to 1796. That's there. On the left, Robert Thomas Hamilton's aside, the Royal School of Edinburgh. The school was in here from 1829 until 1968. Since 1968, this building has been lying empty. It's just about to become the permanent home for Edinburgh's famous St Mary's Music School. Up on the right, Cotton Hill with the upturned towers. It's a lovely, easy walk up to the top of Cotton Hill. Massive space up there with some of the best views in central Scotland. On the left-hand side, some entrances. September 1939, designed by Thomas S. Taft, who also designed the Meadows in the city of which its offices of the Scottish government. It's always had a civil service connection. And here on the left, we're quite barren ground, we're a great graveyard, the grave of the great philosopher David Hume. Great views right along Princess Street, and that clock tower is on Meadows Hotel. It opened in 1902 as the North British Railway Hotel at the North British Railway Station. It's a 5-star hotel, so why, if you're looking at the clock in a 5-star hotel, have its clock at the wrong time? The same company, the North British Railway Company, owned the hotel and they owned the railway station. They wanted people to catch their trains, so in 1902 they set the clock at least 3 minutes fast to make people think they were going to be late if they didn't hurry. And it's set to the correct time only one day every year on December 31st for Edinburgh's famous Hogmanay celebrations, and then on January 1st it goes back to being at least 3 minutes fast again. It changed its name from the North British to the Balmoral in the 1990s. Everybody in Edinburgh still calls it the North British or the NB, just the same. And the railway station is also a name change. It's called Waverley Railway Station. One of the great things in August in Edinburgh during the Edinburgh Festival to get away from it is to go into the bar at the North British. It's pretty expensive, but it's an oasis. We're coming along Princess Street, and on the left-hand side, Waverley Railway Station. It's the second largest railway station. Explorer and doctor of the 19th century, spent most of his adult life in Africa, and on the stage of Edinburgh. The reason I mention the statue is because it's one of the few lying statues of Edinburgh, which was created by a woman, Amelia Robertson. In the 1950s and 1960s, there was a plan to knock down all the buildings on the right-hand side, the north side of Princess Street, and replace them with brutalist concrete block architecture with a walkway all the way along. We even put one of them in place to show us how lucky we were going to be. That's up there on the right-hand side. By the time the late 1960s came around and people decided this maybe wasn't the best idea they'd ever had, the damage had been done, and many significant molecular buildings have gone from Princess Street. I remember some of them very well. Here on your right hand side, that's the only original building left in Princess Street from 1767 to 1830, number 95. It's just closed as a Cafe Nero. It's just about to open as a black sheep coffee. I'm guessing in 6 months' time it'll be a Costa's. In a year it'll be a Starbucks. And in 18 months it can go back to being a Cafe Nero again. It's a pity. There are many original buildings left in the new town. It's just, it annoys me that in what should be Edinburgh's flagship street, we've only got one left, and that is it. Well, we're in Princes Street. The first new town has 3 main streets. Princes Street to the south, George Street on the ridge, and over on the other side of George Street we've got Queen Street. Now this is one of the great valleys that the glacier carved out, the valley of Princes Street. But we'll go up to the ridge coast and up to George Street. This is another bus stop from Princes Street. Anyone from here? Yes, we have one for this bus stop. Thank you very much, John. We'll let you know when you're definitely safely at the bus stop and you can leave. Thank you very much for coming on the tour. We do appreciate it. Have a lovely evening in Edinburgh. It's a very safe city. Thank you. This is the bus stop. You can safely leave here. Thank you. Bye-bye. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Goodbye. Oh, good. Yeah. Glad you enjoyed it. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thanks. Bye-bye. When we had all this land, all these country estates to build on, we decided we'd not make the same mistakes that had been made in the old town for hundreds and hundreds of years. Some parts of the old town, if you went to the top of a building, you could stick your hand out of a window and touch a building on the other side of the street. Now, we've all seen illustrations of streets like that. Some of the buildings in those streets were 13 stories tall. It was dirty, dark, diseased, overcrowded, dangerous, claustrophobic. So, when we built this wonderful new town, and it was only 3 streets, that's all it was going to be as an experiment, to see if it would work. They decided that the buildings would be basement, ground floor, first floor, second floor, and capped at that. And you can see on your right there, these are some of the original buildings. And they've got dormers built on top, but they are original buildings from 1767 to 1830. Now just up here as well is Rose Street. I said there was 3 main streets. There are 3 crossover streets: Hanover Street, Frederick Street and Castle Street, and 2 small streets. Rose Street here, which is the symbol of England, and its mirror image on the other side is Thistle Street, which is the symbol of Scotland. We're coming up to the William Pitt statue in the middle of George Street. Our youngest ever Prime Minister, elected at the age of 24. At Christmas one year, his administration became known as the Mince Pie Administration, and he died in 1806. And he was Prime Minister for some of the time when they were building these streets. Now, turning into George Street, 110 feet wide, just for show, just because we could. You could turn 6 horses in a carriage in one movement. To spot the original buildings, now I've told you the basement, ground floor, first floor, second floor. As we come to this junction here, down on the right hand side is North Castle Street, and that is pretty much an original street. Walter Scott, he lived down there. Just on the right hand side at number 3 North Castle Street. And we're heading to that green dome and gold top St George's Church. It's not a church anymore. Since 1970 it's been part of the records offices of Scotland, and as the court records for Scotland since court records began, it was a church for 150 years from 1814 to 1963. Charlotte Square was designed by Robert Adam in 1791. Adam then sadly died in 1792, and he never even saw ground broken on his greatest achievement. Sad. It's one of the architectural jewels of the world. It's worth having a walk around Charlotte Square. You can see the buildings, basement, ground floor, first floor, second floor, steps leading up to discourage people. No dormers, Veluxes and skylights, of course, but no dormers in these buildings. Now I said that St Andrew Square was the financial district for Edinburgh, but this was also a financial district, but this where St Andrew Square was public banks and insurance companies, and this was always private banks and private financial companies all the way around Charlotte Square, and it still pretty much is. It also has an attraction called the Georgian House. The Georgian House was restored to how it would have looked in 1796 when the Lamont family first moved in. Now as we turn to our left, come to the traffic lights, and on the right hand side there's a lone traffic light, and behind it there's a blue door on the side of the building on the right there. In that building Alexander Graham Bell was born, usually more associated with the United States and Canada, and he lived and worked in the United States, and he lived, worked and died in Canada, but he was born, brought up and educated here in Edinburgh, born in that building and educated at the old Royal High School building that we saw at the top of Regent Road just about 5 minutes ago. He was a speech therapist. His mother was deaf, his wife was deaf, and he was working on a speech therapy machine for the deaf when he invented his telephone. Now we're going to turn into Charlotte Square, and this is, I know the number of this one, this is bus stop number 13. Anyone for Charlotte Square? We have people for Charlotte Square, thank you very much, John.
Oh,
Just
the telephone.
where the white coaches on the far side of the square is where the bus stop is. And it's a good stop for the West End, for the Dean Village, and also for the Georgian House. And we'll be stopping at bus stop number 13 in just a few minutes. Thank you very much for coming to Edinburgh in the first place. Secondly, for coming on our tour. We really appreciate it. We take nothing for granted. And this is your bus stop. When we stop, you can see through the. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Goodbye. Bye-bye, thank you. Goodbye, goodbye. Goodbye. The gardens on the right-hand side, Charlotte Square Gardens, until last August, every year for 30 years, had the Edinburgh International Book Festival, which is certainly my favourite Edinburgh festival. Moved from here, it's now in the Art College up at Launceston. Coming into the north side of the square, and the Georgian House is coming up on your left. A discount going in with your bus ticket. And here on the left is number 6, Bute House, the official residence of the First Minister of Scotland. We'll turn to our left out of Charlotte Square into North Charlotte Street, and that will take us down to the northern boundary of the first new town, Queen Street. Queen Street and Princes Street are built as mirror images of one another 250 years ago. Residential on one side and gardens on the other. Now, the gardens in Princes Street, as we know, are public. The gardens here in Queen Street are private. You have to own property here. You pay about £300 a year for a key to get into your garden. When we get to the gardens on the left, if you look down through them, that's Heriot Road in the centre of Newtown, done in 1820. Heriot Road, number 17, is the Edinburgh home for William Stevenson, our greatest ever writer. Stevenson and his wife Fanny Osborne set off on a voyage around the South Seas to find better climate for his health. He'd had hemorrhaging lungs his entire life. They settled in the Sandwich Islands, and then for 4 years they lived in Samoa. Now, as soon as Stevenson got to Samoa, he fell in love with the place, and the people of Samoa fell in love with Stevenson. He became known as Tusitala in their local language, the teller of tales. Stevenson said that when he died he wanted to be buried on the summit of Mount Vea, which is the local peak at Apia, the capital of Samoa. He built a community and a home at a place called Vailima, and December 3rd, 1894, he was in Vailima. He was straining to open a bottle of wine when he suddenly said to his wife, "Does my face look strange?" And he collapsed and he died 2 hours later from a cerebral hemorrhage. The people of Vailima mounted a watch guard on his body all night, and the next morning his coffin was carried to the summit of Mount Vea, and he was buried when he'd asked to be buried. They built a tomb on top of the grave, which I'll never see. I wish I could, but I won't. And on the side of the tomb they inscribed Stevenson's poem Requiem. Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me lie. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I laid me down with a will. This be the verse you grave for me. Here he lies where he longed to be. Home is the sailor, home from sea, and the hunter, home from the hill. He was a magnificent man, Stevenson, and it's criminal that he's so under-celebrated in this, his hometown, and he's still a national hero in Samoa. Well, we're going to turn up to our right-hand side here into north St David Street, and that will take us back to bus stop number 1 in St Andrew's Square, and that's the final bus stop. Now, on behalf of John, our excellent driver, and myself, John, your guide, I'd like to thank you all for coming to Edinburgh in the first place. Secondly, for coming on our tours to take nothing for granted. A lovely evening in Edinburgh, and the first bus tomorrow will be leaving from here, St Andrew's Square, at 9 a.m. And when John pulls the bus to a complete standstill, then you can safely leave.
So that's us, folks. I hope you enjoyed the Edinburgh bus tour and the summer edition, and saw a few things there and possibly received a lot of information there that was very historical. So signing out, folks. Hope to see you all on the next journey. TCSS, take care, stay safe. Bye for now.